The morning my husband of 42 years passed away, I remember staring at his empty chair at the kitchen table and wondering how I would survive. That was 18 months ago. The grief counselor said it would get easier, but she never mentioned how the silence would become my constant companion. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 63 years old, I found myself starting over in ways I never imagined. Richard had handled everything. The finances, the house maintenance, even the grocery shopping in those final years when my hip made walking difficult. When he was gone, I discovered we had almost nothing. The medical bills had eaten through our savings. The life insurance barely covered the funeral. Our daughter lived in Seattle and called once a month if I was lucky. Our son had his own family in Texas and his own problems. So I did what any desperate widow would do. I sold the house we had lived in for 30 years, paid off what I could, and moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Then I got a job. At 63, with a bad hip and outdated skills, my options were limited. But the Good Shepherd Senior Center needed a part-time receptionist, and they were willing to hire someone my age. The pay was modest, $12 an hour for 25 hours a week, but it was something. It gave me a reason to get dressed in the morning. Every day, I took the bus from my apartment to the senior center. The route passed through downtown, and I always got off 2 stops early so I could walk the last bit. The doctor said walking was good for my hip, and honestly, I needed the fresh air. That's how I first noticed him. He sat on the same bench outside the public library every single morning, an old black man with white hair and kind eyes. He wore the same faded green jacket regardless of the weather, and he always had a small paper cup in front of him. He never asked anyone for money. He never called out to passers-by. He just sat there, quiet and dignified, watching the world go by. Something about him reminded me of my father. Maybe it was the way he held himself, straight-backed despite his circumstances. Maybe it was the gentle way he nodded at people who walked past, even the ones who pretended not to see him. The first time I stopped, I didn't know what to say. I just dropped a $5 bill into his cup and mumbled something about having a nice day. He looked up at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "God bless you, ma'am. You have a kind heart." I walked away with tears in my eyes. I couldn't explain why. After that, it became our routine. Every morning, I would stop by his bench, drop in whatever cash I had, sometimes $5, sometimes just the change from my pocket. We started talking. I learned his name was Samuel Washington. He was 74 years old. He had been a high school history teacher for 35 years before he retired. His wife had passed away 6 years ago. His pension had been lost in some kind of fraud scheme. His apartment had been sold out from under him when the building was converted to condos. Now he slept at the shelter when there was room, on the street when there wasn't. His story broke my heart. A man who had spent his life teaching children, shaping young minds, now sitting on a bench with a paper cup. The injustice of it made me angry in ways I hadn't felt in years. "You should be living somewhere warm," I told him one November morning when the temperature had dropped below freezing. "You should have a roof over your head." Samuel just smiled. "The Lord provides, Mrs. Margaret. He sent you to me, didn't he?" I didn't feel like much of a provision. A few dollars here and there, some conversation to break up his lonely days. But Samuel always seemed grateful, always had a kind word, always asked about my life at the senior center, about my children, about how I was coping with my own loss.